Hello, if I press the buttons right, we should be live now. Otherwise, we will hear complaints in the live stream that audio is not on or something like that. So welcome to the second installation of our language and runtime community stand-up, where we hopefully talk about community stuff as well as stuff we want to share early that we haven't shared in blog posts or any other venue quite yet. So let's start with introductions. Rich, why don't you start?
Yeah, Rich Lander. I work with these folks. I focus on .NET runtimes.
Philip Carter. I work on FSharp and .NET tooling integration inside of Visual Studio.
I'm Emil Landworth. I wear the better purple color, just for reference.
No.
I work on the framework stuff, BCL stuff, library stuff, .NET Standard.
I'm Kathleen Dollard. I work on the SDK and CLI and Visual Basic and some other, work on C# as well, and that's about it.
Awesome. So then maybe let's just jump in. Now I have to find the button that I have to press, and hopefully I get this right. Oh yeah, look at this. So we are small in the window and we see my screen big, so that's exactly what I wanted. So I don't know whether people saw that. Like, what about people on the table? Did you guys see the tweet from Ben Adams?
Yeah.
Can you look at the number of likes that this thing got? It's ridiculous. I think I've never made a tweet that got that many.
1.2K.
Yes.
Yeah, that's getting into
pretty good.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez territory in terms of Twitter engagement.
In terms of likability, I guess?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I actually did one that got to that one, which was, believe it or not, that .NET Core 3 was going to have COM interop support.
Okay.
And that was the one where I posted a picture of driving Excel with .NET Core. That got around 1,200 likes.
Yeah, if people don't know on the call, like the Ben Adams is one of our key contributors across pretty much all repos. I think he's one of those people that, you know, he does a game that you should check out, and he's interested in making sure that his game gets the most performant platform that you can build, and so he will submit PRs wherever he feels like he can gain more wins, whether it's the runtime or the framework or ASP.NET or the web server, like whatever we have open source. I think he submitted PRs or at least issues for. And so he wrote a very in-depth blog post that you should definitely check out. So it's, you know, the picture kind of like speaks for itself already. Like he ran the Tech Empower benchmark. Because you have not heard of Tech Empower. It's kind of an industry benchmarking, competition, I guess, where they compare multiple different platforms for doing web development across all languages and all of that. And so it's mostly a throughput benchmark, meaning like how many requests a second can your server handle before it falls over. So, and as with any benchmark, it's kind of a little bit like, microscopic in the sense that it's not a representation usually for what you actually do, but it gives you an idea of like, how much bare metal you can get out of the system. And so he has a chart here where he compares the things that he cares about, and there's more stuff in there. But the blog post goes into a lot of detail on, how ASP.NET works right now, where the performance throughputs improvement came from. I think 2.1 was our release where we had the most gains, I think, right? Like where we, was it 2.1? I think it was
2.1 was pretty radical.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then you just see like what ends up happening, and like it's super detailed, and he looks at all the other things as well. Like there's a MySQL benchmark as well, how well that does, and it's pretty much something you should check out if you've never seen this. He also talks about community and .NET Core and ASP.NET Core. The funny thing is that somebody, I think, on his tweet complained that it's Microsoft, so there must be some sort of negative aspect to that. And Ben just said, "Look, this is an open source platform. It's .NET Core. It's running on a Linux box. Like, how much more do you want?" And I think it's pretty much true. Like, I mean, of course, every company has their own agenda, but the tech is as it is, right? Choose the tech. It makes you happy, I guess. And if performance was one of your primary concerns, then hopefully this makes you sleep better. So Rich, you had some interesting exchange. You want to talk about this?
Sure, yeah. This was as far back as yesterday. Yeah, so there was this developer, Natalia Portillo, who I think is from Spain, Girly and Geek handle. And so the question was, with all the hype of memory of T and span of T, there's one unclear thing. If I want to access memory of T with array indexers, I must use .span, but is that doing a memory copy that would defeat the purpose? The very good observation, that would indeed defeat the purpose if that was the case. And so, so there is no copy at all, which I later said somewhere It's actually a very cheap operation to get a span from a memory of T. But we should back up just a tiny, tiny bit, which is, so there are these two types, span of T and memory of T, and they kind of are intended for different reasons. So I actually just started building this app. It's actually a Sudoku, if I'm even saying that right, Sudoku solver. And so I'm using memory of T and span of T in the minute. I have to say this is actually the first app where I've really tried to use them. And my experience of using span of T and memory of T feels very similar to learning how to use task and async wait correctly. And so you eventually kind of figure out what the pattern is, but it feels like quite strange at first. The other thing that's super funny about, and I was going to ask Stephen Tobe this, because he's the one who gave me this little code sample. This memory pin thing feels very similar to me to like if you want to wrap some kind of async work, particularly if it's using the old async system, use this thing like completion source.
Yeah.
The memory pin thing, this memory handle memory pin thing feels similar to me to that. I don't know if that's a very good analogy.
Maybe.
It's probably a horrible analogy. But anyway, so this person was trying to, I don't know exactly what device I/O control does, but I assume it's something with hardware on Linux. Yeah, so they're asking if span could allow them to do it in a safe way, and the answer is no.
Yes, I think the question usually is, right, like span is effectively these two things combined, right? Like logically, a span is nothing more than a pointer and a length, right? And it allows you to pass this around as one unit. And then there's no APIs that allow you in a safe way to get a pointer, right? Because in C#, as soon as you want to talk about anything with an asterisk, you have to be in unsafe context, right? Mm-hmm. And so the interesting idea with span is that at the very bottom of your stack, let's say a web server, for example, the OS gives you a buffer where basically your network output goes in. And then what you do is you have your pipeline, right? You have your HTML parsing, whatever, and then you just pass the span up stack, right? And so everybody else who just wants to read or write stuff, they just basically get a span, and span has an indexer and a length, and you do whatever you want. If you have some unsafe code in the middle that needs to access this thing as a pointer, then yes, all you have to do is basically get the memory address and do whatever you want to do. And then you just go about your business. The key thing in .NET is that because we have a GC, our memory is not pinned, right? So like if you get an address to an object, well, that object might be moved by the GC. So pinning just makes sure that the GC doesn't do that. And of course, if you want to have a scalable app, you want to eventually unpin the memory. And that's effectively what that snippet does, right? It just says, okay, now the memory is fixed, and now you can actually ask for the pointer and do whatever you want to do with that.
Yeah, I think in this particular case, so everything you said made sense. In the case that you said, the web server and your web app would be in two different assemblies. And so one would be compiled unsafe,
yes,
the first one, and the app one would have the pleasure of not being compiled and luxury of not being compiled unsafe. In this particular case, you could imagine that maybe this person's building a library, but maybe they're just writing this code as part of their application, at which point compiling unsafe is less pleasant.
Right, which is why you generally want to have APIs that just take span and then delegate down, right? So somebody could write a device I/O control overload, right, that just takes a span of T, and implementation of that just does that, right? And then people can just pass spans around rather than having to deal with
them. And it also depends completely on what the workflow/usage pattern of an API is. Like the thing I was writing, I wanted to be able to new up this class, and so that it has to hold on to a memory of T. It can't just deal completely. It gives out spans, but it has to hold on to this data that it actually gets from somewhere else.
Right.
In the case of this one, you would hope that. Actually, I guess this one's actually similar to the one I just said. Now that I think about it.
Yeah. One other interesting thing with span is that span is a type. It's a new kind of type, right? It's what we call ref-only structs or ref-only types. So basically what this does is it doesn't allow the callee to stash it away, right?
Then that's the memory of T case I was just talking about.
So imagine this device I/O control would actually take a span, what you would do is you would pin the memory, construct a span over that address, which you could basically say new span, passing in a pointer and the length, and you have a span over that native memory. And then I can call the device IO method, and then once the method returns, I know I can unpin the memory because this guy could not have stashed away the address, so that's safe, right? Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it wouldn't be safe because the guy might refer to memory that now is gone, right? Or is elsewhere, right? So this is the other nice thing when you think of a network stack, is that at the very bottom, somebody allocates memory, wraps it in a span, passes it out, and then as the stack unwinds, you can do something interesting with that. The only downside is it doesn't work well with async, right? As soon as you do async operations, you have to let the stack unwind, and then you get a completion later, and that's where memory of T comes in.
Yeah, and another place where you run into that, which makes total sense, but isn't necessarily intuitive at first. It's like, oh, like, what I want to do is write this iterator, is that the correct term, where I'm doing yield return. Yep. So I've got this method, got this for each inside of it, and it's like, oh, well, clearly I just want to have an async enumerable of span of T. Wouldn't that be awesome?
Yes.
But you can't do that.
You cannot.
For the exact reason that you just said. By the way, I tried. Anyway, this was a good conversation. So I had an email thread going with Stephen Tobe and Jan, and they were actually basically I was their sneakernet gopher for most of these responses.
That's actually the reason why people like you and me look so smart on social
yes.
media. You just ping people in
your friends.
Yeah, and then it's like, oh, God, I have this awesome code snippet somebody else wrote.
I'm definitely not embarrassed to say that.
So for all the people who are under 30 like me, what does sneakernet mean?
Oh. I refuse to answer that.
We'll let that go. No, we're just letting that go.
Oh my God.
I'm young and naive, man.
First of all, you're not that young.
Actually, I watched Sneakers for the first time last year.
What is Sneakers?
It's mostly terrible. It's like a hacker movie.
Oh, jeez.
Oh,
God, no.
I mean, there's hackers.
No, the one with Robert Redford in it. It's mostly terrible.
Okay.
Sneakers. Robert Redford.
Had nothing to do with Sneakers.
In a hacker movie? Okay.
1992. Wow, I was 2 years old.
Yeah, that movie.
Yeah.
Okay.
Movie Stand-Up is also about movie reviews. Send us your favorite movies and we will do a review on that.
No.
Blackmailed by government agents.
So since we now talk about
I want to watch this.
Exhausting list of differences in movies, let's also talk about exhausting list of differences between VB.NET and
yeah, this is amazing. Anthony D. Green is a community member now, but used to work for Microsoft. Is one of the big proponents of Visual Basic. Absolutely awesome guy. He put together, he has a really deep perspective on Visual Basic, what it means, and the differences between Visual Basic and C#. And he put together this blog post, which printed is like 58 pages. So it's an investment. What I really think folks should definitely do is take a look at it. Can you scroll down to where the rules are? Because it just gives you an idea of what he's...
Are you kidding me? Like, you see the scroll bar here?
Yeah, you got to go through the massive table of
No, it's just like
contents.
down by one page. It's not far. It's just, you just went too fast. No, it's not. That was, never mind.
Let's talk about the interface implementation
Near the top.
Because those are
No, that's not what I wanted to talk about.
Fine.
Near the top, he explains what he's doing here. And I just wanted folks to see what he's trying to accomplish.
Oh, the ground rules for the...
Yes, those. That's all I wanted to have up, right? Okay, it's a little small text, but we'll let that go. So at any rate, because this blog post is one having small, not having a big font on this one, it's really big. Anyway, it's absolutely fantastic blog post. And if you touch VB at all, if it's in your, if you have any VB assets, if you program VB every day, if it's anywhere there, or if you just want to see an absolutely amazing in-depth exploration of a language, bookmark this thing and take a look at it when you have a question or you have some time to look over it, because it is an amazing piece of work. So.
Oh yeah. Especially if you're just into language design as a whole. Like if you're not a VB developer or even a C# developer, like just sort of the depth that he goes into in terms of discussing trade-offs. And like, for example, like how the rules for null comparison work for VB versus C# and how they're slightly different for certain things, and how that enables certain things and disables other things is like, I don't know, it's really great.
He talks a lot about why some things happen. So some things are just because it came from VB6. Some things are because a particular decision was made, and a little bit of context on that. And so it gives you a little bit of insight on the fact that language design is so iterative and so long term. And I'm just waiting until you do this for F#.
hey, there's a spec.
Yeah, this is not a spec though. This is really and plus it's much more. It's much more entertaining than a spec. It's not a formal, it's like, here's the story of VB. And so, anyway, it's an absolutely fantastic post, and I would encourage that people go look at it just to be in awe, if nothing else, because it's one of the most, big deal kind of posts I've seen in a long time. So,
and what I find is also even more impressive about this is I think I counted only one place where in the why section he was like, I have no idea. Every other case he like knew, even though he didn't always implement all that stuff. So like you can tell that he actually went back and he actually asked all of these people who had worked on this in the past and said like, why is this the way that it is?
Right. Well, it's a great time because right now with VB just moving onto .NET Core in a big way. I mean, it was there, but it didn't have the runtime. And I was just in a meeting yesterday about the steps we're going to take in terms of when things are going to come out in Preview 3 and Preview 4 and Preview 5 across the VB, getting that the VB runtime in the hands of people so they can do .NET Core that looks like VB instead of not looking like VB. So
it's interesting. Like, to me, the other thing that I found interesting about posts like this is that he's basically covering all the parts that are usually invisible, right? People always focus on the syntactic differences or the obvious features that are missing, right? And it's always hard to explain to people like why language design is hard. I mean, if you never implemented a compiler, if you never thought about how expressions compose, it's very subtle to talk about things like, well, what rules do you have for conversions? And like, if you apply them and you select a method, what would happen? Which one would you end up picking? And the interesting thing, I think, with this post is that he walks through all these corner cases where VB made different decisions from C#, right? And that's, I think, part of the reason why these languages can feel in practice fairly different, modulo the fact that they're different keywords, right? And I think that if you're interested in language design in general, even if you dislike VB, I think it's a very good post to read. And small things like this, I didn't even know about this. You think this is something everybody should know, but like I had no idea that VB does that.
Smart quotes.
It's cool. So another thing I wanted to a little bit pitch is that, I don't know about you, but like I have a hard time keeping up with what's going on in the wild. And there's a few interesting projects that are going on. So Ed Thompson, I think he's back at Microsoft. He used to work on Visual Studio /TFS/Git integration.
He was away from Microsoft?
Yeah, he moved to GitHub for a while, and then I think he quit GitHub. He is back at Microsoft now, I think.
But for multiple years, I thought.
Yeah. Okay, this is an ongoing thing, I think. But he always was working, I think, in something related to version control. So what he did is he has the Developer Tools Weekly newsletter. You can just submit your own email address, and I've done this, and there's no spam, right? He's just hand curating things that are interesting. So let we just look at this one here. He's talking about here's some interesting articles. It's everything. If you're doing .NET development, if you're doing DevOps with .NET or C#, whatever, it's super interesting. And like, there's lots of cool stuff that if you want to see what's going on without spending a day on the internet yourself, it's super interesting to subscribe. And then, Philip, I think you should talk about this.
Yeah. So this is a related thing. It's called FSharp Weekly, run by Sergey Tihon. I think that's how it's pronounced. He's from Belarus, so I don't know the correct pronunciation. But he's been doing a weekly mailing list. Like he takes maybe 1 week off a year or something, and he aggregates very interesting blog posts, things that are happening in the FSharp community, things that are happening on our open source repos and things like that, and just lists them all out, tweets it out. He gets thousands of readers each month, and it's fantastic. FSharp Weekly, if you subscribe to it, you'll basically just get something each week of anywhere from 10 to 50 links, just curating absolutely everything that's going on in the FSharp community. And so you can get a lot of really excellent blog posts about interesting ways to do things. There's really good pull requests that are happening, not necessarily for the FSharp code base, but also just in FSharp community projects we'll get linked to here. So if there's a new feature coming into, say, Ionide, which is a cross-platform IDE IDE plugin for Visual Studio Code. If there's a really interesting feature going in there, he'll link it there so you can see, oh, there's this new feature coming into tools that I use, for example. And so it's really great from a discoverability standpoint. He also actually hosts an advent of basically an advent of code sort of thing for FSharp. during Christmas time. So basically, well, sorry, for the month of December, not necessarily Christmas time. And basically what he does is he does a call for blog posts about a couple weeks in advance, and basically just wants people from the community to write a blog post corresponding to a particular day in December, and then he publishes it that way. And then by the end of December, you have just this utterly massive list of posts of just cataloging just kind of interesting things you can do with the language. So this year, I think he had like 3 posts per day. Like 3 individual separate posts per day coming from people. He kept running out of space and having to allocate more and more space. So there were a lot of people that were really interested in this. And so there's an incredible backlog of just really great posts as well. So I recommend checking it out.
So a question came in on Twitch.
Yep.
On FSharp.
Oh boy.
So what about covariance and contravariance in FSharp, and why isn't that supported? That's the question.
It really complicates the type system.
It complicates the type system, okay.
Yeah, because we do type inference for everything, and so it's not impossible to do. It's just not really the biggest thing to do. So like in terms of impact compared with amount of work that has to go into it, there's a lot of work that has to go into making it work properly, but the impact is fairly small.
Right, are you saying it's smaller than it would have been in C# if C# didn't have it?
Yeah, well, I mean, the C#, there's a lot of Java-isms that are kind of ported over into C#, and like that's an example of one that if you learn Java and you didn't have it in C#, you'd be like, what the heck? So that's sort of where it stands. I mean, it's something that's certainly, I don't know if we'd necessarily ruled it out from the language, but it's certainly, our bang for our buck is quite small. For that feature.
All right. Is there a weekly that you know of for the .NET Core or the runtime?
Well, there are some. There are a bunch of mailing lists, or it's really daily blogs. Like there's, oh man, I can't even remember them now. I used to follow them super closely, but there's like some morning cup of something. There's a bunch that we get pulled into, but they're more general than .NET. They just happen to get, happen to get pulled into them.
All right.
So
awesome.
Speaking of like
what do we have next?
community stuff, let's talk about some of these PRs that you gave me.
Yeah, so we have an amazing community contributor. His name is Avi Avni. I think, is he based out of Tel Aviv?
He's from Israel.
Yeah, and so he's one of those really cool people where we will file an issue. Like, for example, we did some investigative work on memory allocations and the tooling, and he immediately just jumped in and said, "Oh, I think I know how I could fix this problem." And within like a day, he submitted a pull request. And so there's actually 3 pull requests that are going to be going into Visual Studio 2019 that are all his work. One of them is this one was pretty cool, I think, called Remove Memory Allocate. Yeah, so this is this one's actually more of a cleanup effort. This is him basically looking at stuff and going, oh, there's just a bunch of kind of dumb stuff going on in this code. Let me just clean it all up. And so he did. There were a few others that are rather impactful. The way that we do format strings, the way that the compiler reads FSharp format strings, he completely changed so that it doesn't, like it had this problem where it would reallocate a whole bunch of very large strings, and that would throw that in a large object heap. And so then in a long running process, the large object heap would get a lot bigger. Eventually the GC has to pause all threads. You get a big UI delay in Visual Studio. That kind of sucks. He just completely made that problem go away.
Awesome.
And there was another, we have an algorithm inside of our compiler that computes string distance. So like if you mistype something and you get a compile error saying, I don't know what this identifier is, the compiler can actually generate suggestions that'll say, oh, did you mean any one of these like 5 things that are sort of generated by a score that's calculated by a string distance algorithm. And so he cleaned up that string distance algorithm so that it does just less work as a whole too. So.
Can I just say one thing?
Yeah.
You guys should not name things. Just looking at the code, I'm like, what the heck is this?
Yeah.
So this is IL Write. Like that's probably the most obscure one because we need to convert from FSharp world into IL world.
I see.
And IL's not
pretty.
Not pretty, no.
I see. Because I just look at this name, I'm like, I have no idea what this thing does.
Gen custom attributes past 3 or 4. Yeah, I mean, like, this is basically, this is the part of the compiler that needs to understand all of the quirks of IL. And so you just end up with messed up names as a result.
So like, kudos to Avi to go through all of this.
Oh yeah, absolutely. and he just, yeah, he's one of those people who will just dive into just the depths of a really, really obscure code base and make sense out of it, which is pretty incredible.
Yeah, I had him on .NET show like about a year ago about what it's like to be a community .NET developer.
And he likes it?
Yeah.
Despite that Philip is there?
That didn't come up, so.
That's awesome. So there's another thing I think he did here, massive string allocations.
Yeah, I think this is the one that I had mentioned about the format strings. Yeah. And it was actually, it was just a part of the code base that was kind of just silly. Like, in retrospect, you're like, why would it ever be implemented the way that it was? But you know, you only get that sort of thing in retrospect. Like, you know, hindsight's 20/20, and so he's the one that allows us to have hindsight of 20/20. So.
There's a comment. This guy also made the generic attributes PRs for CoreFX, CoreCLR.
Oh, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm. And then it says, which really should be merged one of these days.
Somebody should look into that.
Somebody should look into that.
Yeah, yep.
If only I knew somebody on that team. So do you want to talk about the applied FSharp story? Because I think it came up in the other one as well.
Yeah, so there's also a really cool initiative coming from the FSharp board. I'm a member of the FSharp board, but I wasn't the one who created this. This is actually Lena Hall, who is sort of the mastermind behind this. The idea being that there's a whole lot of really, really smart FSharp programmers out there in sort of a wide variety of domains. And increasingly, we've been seeing, like in the past, there was a lot of sort of financial, scientific stuff associated with FSharp. We're now seeing a ton of stuff associated with the web and with cloud computing. But there's more than just that in the world. And so you can kind of get the impression that, like, if you're getting into FSharp, you're getting into like the Twitter sphere, the blogosphere, or something like that. You'll see a lot of stuff for the web, and you'll be like, oh, FSharp is good for the web. Sweet. But my job, I need to do a GPU compute. Like, can I use FSharp for that? And so the answer is yes, but it may be more difficult to find information about that. And so Lena had this great idea, which is like, well, if we host a challenge to basically have 2 forms of submissions that people could have, where one is like you submit like a paper or a technical blog post or something just talking about cool and interesting stuff that you can use the language for, and like sort of demonstrating a unique thing that the language offers for the domain, or like an interesting pull request that sort of shows things that you can do in code that are really unique and that you won't be able to find in other languages. You can just submit that through the FSharp challenge, and then it gets voted on by some of the experts in the community as sort of like, you know, is this something that we think is really cool? And there's prizes, like everybody who submits gets a prize, like you get stickers, and you know, your name gets listed on a thing as like someone who submitted, and then the people who win get like sort of a community title, like official FSharp, recognized FSharp expert. By the FSharp Software Foundation. So yeah, it's really cool. So anybody who's an FSharp programmer out there, if you have something interesting that you think is worth telling the world, absolutely submit to this challenge, because it's pretty radical.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
While you were saying that, actually there's another thing I just thought about this, which we also haven't plugged today, before I think. On the .NET Foundation, there is this thing here, the announcing .NET Foundation open membership. So similar to the FSharp, there's a .NET Foundation, which hopefully you have heard of at this point. Otherwise, we need to make more advertisement for it. There, you can apply for .NET Foundation membership, and basically what that means is you have to convey that you're actually contributing to .NET, meaning, you know, submit your PRs, whatever you have done to the community, and then it's paid. Although money is not the issue. If you don't have the money, if you don't have less money, or if you don't have any money, that you can still join the foundation. But the idea is you want to use the membership to make the foundation more independent of Microsoft in terms of money, but also in terms of people and in terms of influence. So the idea is that with this membership, you also get the right to vote, for example, to become a board member, to vote for other board members. So this is like our continued quest of like making the .NET Foundation more meaningful, more impactful to people outside of Microsoft. And so if you have not done this, go here, check it out, read it, and then apply. And I think the first round of submissions, I think, is reviewed since, I think as of Friday, and I think there's another round coming. So by all means, go there, check it out. Kathleen, you sent me a bunch of stuff.
I was going to say, can we talk about MSBuild?
Yes. Oh, this is MSBuild one?
The
yes.
saga of MaxPath. Okay, this
Microsoft
is... Oh, Microsoft and MaxPath, oh my gosh. So it's like, yeah, you know what? Who'd ever need this path longer than 256 characters? Who'd ever need that? So this has been a huge journey for .NET and Visual Studio, and we keep
and Windows.
So it's a stepwise journey. So it gets fixed in one place, which exposes the next place that it needs to get fixed. But there's action going on here, and that's really exciting. So you've got that up, so that's great. So MSBuild is now supports MaxPath, and Rainer wrote a fantastic blog post, not a blog post, I'm sorry, it's an issue. And so we'll have the link in the, can you get this link up?
That's a good question, I guess.
Well, we need to, yeah, so anyway, this wound up, this is a comment on an issue. Okay, so we need to get it probably up a little bit more than that. But there's a few things you have to do to make this work, and one of those is to enable Windows to handle MaxPath. Obviously, it wouldn't work without that. And right now, this is works on the command line. We're good to kind of gold on that. But Visual Studio still has some more steps to take. The cool thing was when this got kicked off, one of the things Rainer did, and I just want to point this out because it's part of how we're all working together in more of a collaborative open source manner that is really helping everybody. Right. So Rainer finished this work and he put up the issue, and one of the things in this issue is the second issue that he opened on Roslyn. Mm-hmm. So when he said, okay, the next blocker is Roslyn, he put an issue on the Roslyn repo, and they're actively working on that. There's a PR under review right now to get the next step done. And so I don't know where the end of this process is. I don't know when we say it works everywhere. And I realize that it kind of doesn't work until it works everywhere. Right. But it's been really exciting to take one more step, and kind of a big step in this process that at one point looked like this mountain that could never be climbed. And one little piece at a time, we're actually getting there.
Yeah, one of my devs on the BCL team, he I think started about, I would say, a year and a half ago, reaching out to the shell team in Windows.
Longer ago than that.
Yeah. Well, I think Jeremy started about a year and a half ago, maybe.
Okay, feels longer.
But might be longer. But the thing is that I think he talked to various people. He talked to the shell team, to the people that own CMD, right? The conhost people. He talked to the Win32 folks, and every team he talked to, everybody said, "Man, MaxPath is such an untractable issue. It's easy for us, but the people over there are completely screwed with this thing." And then he walks to the people over there, and they're like, "No, we are fine." It's the people over there that are completely hosed by this. And so he completed the circle, and in the end he concluded well, everybody thinks that they are fine, but everybody else thinks everybody else is screwed. So maybe there is something we can do here. And then they had a massive meeting a few times, and they concluded, yep, we can fix this problem. It just becomes very iterative, right? And I think people still think that MaxPath issue is easy to fix. And if you believe that, I encourage you to read this fairly old blog post from 2007 from Kim Hamilton. She did kind of an exhaustive approach similar to Anthony in terms of MaxPath. So it's a three-part blog that talks about all the issues with MaxPath and how it's materializing itself in API interactions, in application behavior, and what we can do in .NET to fix this. And her conclusion is we can't do anything, right? So it's a bit depressing, but it gives you some historical perspective on why it's hard. And I think since then, our goal was basically to say, let's remove the limitation out of .NET. Let's remove our additional MaxPath checks, so that effectively we just call the underlying Windows APIs. And if they blow up, well then, if Windows ever fixes that, it will fix itself. And for the most part, most applications actually have switched to a different kind of APIs where they the MaxPath constant isn't implied by the API, so things will just generally work. And I think that's where we are right now, is that we basically get to the point where every single component works with longer paths. And then if you look at the build process where you schedule processes or other things, that eventually more and more stuff will just work, right? And I think it will probably take us another 5 years probably until literally everything will work that you care about. But I think VS is not on the path yet, but MSBuild is. Many of the tools MSBuild will run are already handling that, and then eventually it will just work.
Well, the Roslyn work is for Visual Studio, so I was really I felt like you did, it's going to be another 5 years. And then how fast that we got attention on that issue was maybe it won't be 5 years, maybe it'll be faster, but it's still a journey. It's still not, but some things work. I mean, it depends on what you're doing, and so some things work. And you know, it's a journey. We keep going down that one. So, yeah, I was super happy that we've got that in and moving forward. So, yeah.
Another fix is don't use Node, right?
What?
Don't use Node. That also fixes your MaxPath issue.
Yeah, it is a problem.
Yeah.
One piece of context on this and why we didn't fix this issue in 2007, for example, is we had this concern that people would generate files as part of a .NET application and then not be able to view them in Explorer.
Right.
Which felt a bit untenable at the time. More recently, we've rejected that as a concern.
Right. Well, there's also, I think, 2007, we still cared about sandboxing, right? And there's this whole problem of like path. When you go with longer paths, there's ways in Windows where you can basically say, I want to have longer path, but you bypass some of the Windows path normalization, which now is on our end to fix. And that can result in multiple strings designating the same file. So if you have a sandbox that says certain paths should be inaccessible to your app, you might be able to construct strings that no longer are caught by the the deny list effectively. And so that was another concern that we had, which since then we basically said .NET no longer is in the business of sandboxing. So if it's disallowed, then the OS will tell us otherwise. We don't care, right? So yeah, the world has changed, and I think we're getting towards a better place. But there were more PRs you wanted to talk about. I think this was.
I think the PRs that I sent you were around this question right now. I mean, we've got other things going on, but nothing's in a super complete. Let's talk about it today's state. I mean, we're moving forward on a number of fronts.
Right.
A lot of the work that the teams are doing right now are getting ready for the WinForms and WPF work as well. So there's stuff going on there and improving our story. We're working on improving the story on how many SDKs you have on your machine if you install .NET Core, and so that's a really
nice.
big. We will make a big step in preview.
I don't know what you're talking about. I only have that many. It's fine.
Oh, that's.
Oh my gosh! You keep your machine clean.
Yes.
Super clean.
Well, Emo torches this machine like every second day.
Yeah, my machine is like I don't want to use the term underwear, but it's similar in that realm. Like they don't last very long. Like they.
Yeah, I actually test other things, so I actually keep mine super clean so that I know what the experience is for new. When somebody has they have a fairly clean machine and they put on Preview 3 and. So I keep actually a fairly clean machine. I actually found a bug that way. It wasn't a bug. It's a reality. It's not a bug, and that's the global tools target generally 2.1, which is great because that's kind of your lowest common denominator. But since our roll forward policy doesn't roll forward under 3, if all you have on the machine is Preview 3 and you install a global tool, you get a message, and I'm like, oh, I don't like that message. That message could be so much nicer. So we're working on that whole problem is all up, but it's for me, I keep a clean machine, but I bet Rich has more than a couple.
I do not keep a clean machine.
I think most people end up with multiple copies of .NET Core. Do you want to talk about why that is? I think it's mostly
of the SDK or the
like if a random person goes to the file, like what I just did, you see usually 20 or 30 items showing up.
Yeah. So in the change, I can talk about the change that we're making, which is that previously we considered every installation something that you might want to reach back maybe and get, and we finally realized, come on. You know, you're not going to go back for patch releases. And so basically what we're doing is cleaning the machine. If you use an installer, now if you put it on yourself, you have control. So you can still control having every patch or a set of patches if you want. But if what you're trying to do is just have normal stuff for you, we assume that normal is actually more like the highest patch,
right,
and then the minor versions. And so we're doing that on both the SDK and the runtime. And then the SDK is a little confusing because we use the third position, which other people consider a patch. The first hundredths position of that is our minor, so that we can stay lined up on the first two positions with the runtime. So anyway, we will drop it down to having in the SDK 1 per version band, and then as we work on the runtime, I don't think that work is in Preview 3. I'm not sure about that, but we're working on both of those being less impactful on people's machines. And in the meantime, There's Windows add remove programs, and I'm sorry we don't have a better answer. We're also working on that, but that's going to be a little slower.
I think I found somebody on Twitter, I think it was Fowler or somebody who had an actual PowerShell script that auto deletes everything.
Does it does it just delete the folders, or does it go through add remove programs?
Well, I think it just calls the Windows API to basically schedule an uninstall for this installer.
All right, I should reach out because what we'd like to do is be able to make that something like that a global tool. We just haven't quite found the resources yet. So hey, somebody wants to write a global tool that helps people out. There's a lot of folks in this building that would be immensely grateful, and a lot of other people that when they do .NET --info see a frightening list of things on their machine. So
although it'd be nice if the installer just did this for you. Like for example, I installed VideoLAN last night just to update it, and you know, it always just there's several programs like that just update themselves, and says, "Do you want me to just make the old one?" And it says yes.
Well, the problem is that we're hesitant to do that because if somebody has a global.json that pins them back to a previous version, then we don't know that, and we think they actually want that version. So for the installer to just go back to what would be logical for a global.json on the SDK or would be targeted for runtime, that's a pretty big hammer, and we have not decided to do that yet. So as of right now, we're looking at a different way to clean machines, and then going forward, having less on the machine, which also means that going into add remove programs is not quite as painful if you just once a year you have one or two to remove instead of as many as people running a lot of previews have right now. And it's those machines that we're really battering a little bit and trying to make it a better story. We're definitely going to take steps forward, whether it's a journey and we have more steps after that, but we want to take the first steps and get feedback on that.
So one suggestion that I heard, which I think is reasonable, is to say most people get .NET Core via Visual Studio, like as in you install an update and you get it there. That VS itself basically nukes the old one, because if they added it to your box, well, chances are you just want to get the latest version. If you manually install it, sure, let's stick it around, but like if it comes from Visual Studio, it seems reasonable for us to upgrade that.
And that's the story we're working on for Visual Studio. I get my head gets stuck in the CLI sometimes, so I was talking about if you're installing the SDK, like you're using Visual Studio Code or some other situation where you're installing it separately, but Visual Studio will clean up after itself pretty completely. We're going to actually we've got plans where that should be good going forward.
Speaking about cleanup, there's one thing that we should should talk about. We just blocked it yesterday. Probably the URL is no longer right.
What?
No, the URL is right still.
The URL is still right. Yeah, here we go.
It'll be different.
Oh yeah. Well, maybe you should talk about this. I explicitly said I didn't want to work on this. If you remember, I want to continue working on the blog. I just didn't want to work on this upgrade thing.
Yeah, if you follow me on Twitter, you have heard me saying very positive things about our blogging infrastructure, I think. That may not be suitable for PG-13 movies. But regardless of what's happening here is we get a facelift. So our blog itself, if you look at the homepage, just visually, right, it looks a little bit. I mean, the black bar at the top is only what I see because I'm an owner of the blog.
Windows 8 stuff.
But everything underneath it, like this bar here, and then the color theme, like it looks a little bit dated and a little bit busy. So there's a facelift coming for the blog, which makes it look more like this, where you have a cleaner representation. It looks more similar to the other Microsoft properties you have already seen, Microsoft.com, the .NET side, for example, and the header will be part of this experience, and then we have a consistent color theme, and then the actual blog posts themselves look much nicer. They are much more focused on the individual who wrote the blog post. They have a picture, for example, so you can actually recognize your favorite people quickly, I guess, and then say, oh, this guy I don't like, so I don't read the blog post. And so it's kind of interesting to see how people will react to that. And we actually do, believe it or not, actually take feedback. So there's a survey you can fill out and you can tell us what you think about it, including colors, everybody's favorite topic. And then there's also like the typical question of like, well, what happens to the old URLs? Well, the URLs will change. You have a simplified URL, but you also have redirects. So if you have bookmarked your favorite posts or whatever, this should work because we will just redirect them. And same with readers. If you use some newsreader, that should also continue to work. And in the process, we also clean up a little bit. Like I think it's somewhere linked down here. There's actually a list of blocks that we reconcile because we had a large number of blog posts here, block owners across various areas. So some of them are merged, and some of them are just staying different or just getting renamed to make it easier for people to find what it's up. So for example, VS Standup plus Xamarin is now mobile. Hey Scripting Guy is now just scripting. And so like it hopefully becomes easier for people to discover blocks that they haven't read before, and makes it also slightly more.
I love the use of ordered list there. It's like,
yeah,
not the best use of an ordered list.
Yeah, I don't know what the order of this one is.
It's
probably semi-alphabetical, whatever.
Yeah, except not very. Cool. Actually, one thing, I didn't submit this to the list, but it would probably be good to talk about that design, the runtime binding design that I put up.
The runtime binding.
The roll forward stuff or something different? The roll
Yeah,
forward? Yeah.
Yeah, where's that? Is that
It's in the design.
Yeah, and
repo.
we had something come in on Twitch if we want to catch that really quick before we go on to
Go
that.
ahead.
So it was a couple of questions about installation. And Rich, can you confirm with me the apt-get story? What?
Confirm or deny?
Confirm or deny the apt-get story. We don't generally put previews out with apt-get, do we? What's the reasoning for that? Or should that be out there and we've fallen down on that?
I asked this question before.
Drum roll, and the answer was?
Yeah, we're standing on the edge of our seats. Yeah, really.
Let's take a quick look at our release notes.
Okay, and the Simeon, can you let us know if once you found the install scripts, because he said it was really hard to find the install scripts. Now that's something we can fix. But once you found the install scripts, was that did that do the trick? You can. If you put that in the chat window, we'll let people know. I don't have I suddenly found I don't have a Twitch account. I didn't realize that. So I wasn't able to.
Yeah, I think I did ask Lee about this specific question. For some reason, I think we don't put previews up on
it was my recollection, but I didn't remember why.
I don't remember why either.
Okay, well maybe you or I can try to tweet that sometime later today after we talk to Lee.
Oh, on that particular repo? No, at least on, I think it's the core setup repo has like all the latest build previews.
No, but this is if we push them up to our Linux package repository thing.
I see.
Right, so it just makes it a little bit easier to install.
I don't actually know the answer to that question, even though it's been discussed.
All right.
It's no longer a PR.
Oh, it's merged?
It's in the accepted folder.
Oh my God.
I made the decision to merge it, so it's
although we're still taking feedback on it. This is just a way to get
second to last
out there.
At the very bottom. I didn't put it in a folder. So what this is about is our roll forward behavior. And so we already had roll forward for patch version and minor version. So this is the idea that if you've got a 2.0 app and you try and run it on a machine that only has 2.1, the app will work and it will run on 2.1 without any configuration. And I should make this stop beeping. It's actually Kathleen talking to me.
That means you have to. It's me talking to you. You have to buy lunch for that, right? The phone.
Yeah. So that was our behavior, that's our existing behavior. And so we started to have these discussions about what we should do with major version. Now we didn't ever discuss, or not at length, major version roll forward from 1.x to 2.x, just because there were several aspects about the product that were not amenable to roll forward, mostly with respect to the way ASP.NET worked.
Well, there was Project JSON too in there.
No, it didn't have anything to do with that.
Oh, okay.
Because by the time that this is all about after the app's been built.
Okay.
So after the app's been built, Project JSON doesn't exist anymore.
Okay, never mind.
So anyway, but we've fixed all the issues that prevented us from doing this in the past. But we have still decided to not auto roll forward across major versions because that gets us into the excuse the worst of the use of this term, compat hell, that we've had with .NET Framework. So we feel like giving developers choice and users choice with opt-in roll forward for major versions is a good plan.
Right.
But to leave it as opt-in only as opposed to something automatic. So that's basically what this document says.
And also then there's still, you will always be able to just install a matching version, and we would prefer that.
Absolutely.
But then are we going to roll forward from preview to release though? Because that's the one that really.
So this is the one that I've gotten a lot of negative feedback about.
For preview to release or just release to preview?
Okay, so mostly about release to preview.
Release to preview, yeah. You know my opinion.
Yeah, so not many people like this, although I still think it's the right plan. But so just to cover that, today we don't do any roll forward between release and stable versions in any direction. So the first thing that we're going to do is make it so that if you built your app against the very last build of 3.0 preview, and then you take that application or global tool and run on a machine that has the 3.0 stable version, it will now work, which wouldn't have worked in the past. So I think that is mostly a good change. The other proposal that's in this document that's more controversial, and I'd love to get feedback on Twitch and YouTube, is imagine that you built your app against stable, 3.0 stable, but the only thing on the machine is 3.1 preview. So the question is what to do in that situation. So what I think we should do is run the app on 3.1 preview, and not have the runtime binder not pay any attention to whether the runtime is preview or not, and
I think that's just from my own experience from .NET Framework, right? The problem of the binder has never been that it allows things it shouldn't allow, right? The problem has always been that it disallows things that it should have allowed, right? Like I think that's the general why development on .NET Framework can suck at times, is that it just doesn't allow it to bind to a version number.
Yeah,
right?
like the assembly versioning with .NET Core is absolutely that case.
Right.
With runtime versioning, it's hard to say just because we have these in-place updates with .NET Framework, so it's kind of a different.
I think in-place updates is a bit different because that must roll forward. Right?
Yes, so there's really no choice. So to a large degree, now that I think about it, we've always had a roll forward policy to previews with .NET Framework.
Yes.
It's never been not that.
For full framework.
Yes.
Yes, for full framework, we're always roll forward no matter what. But we .NET Core is a new story. .NET Core is explicitly a new story, and ultimately, it's a question of how aggressively we look for the best available to run on the machine instead of refusing to run.
Yeah, here's a good example from your world. Imagine the very first thing you install on your machine is, and imagine we already had all of this in place. 3.0 preview 4. Right. And you try and install a 2.x global tool.
Well, I did that yesterday, and it failed. And
I'm saying, imagine all this was implemented.
Oh, when this was implemented, it would roll forward. And I absolutely think there's no question that there needs to be an opt-in, and that we would teach people with certain deployments, because it's not really global tools. It's the fact you're deploying to a very large universe of people, and you know nothing about the state of their machines. If you're in-house, you know a little bit more about the state of the machine. You're more likely to want a phone call if something goes wrong. So we kind of have those two extremes.
Sure.
And making sure we have opt-in out strategies that work for those extremes, and letting the people in the middle figure out, do I want a phone call as to why this isn't working because somebody took 2.1 off their machine or never had it? And clearly for global tools, no, we just do your best because we can't take the phone call. And so on that end, we absolutely want a strategy, and it's just figuring out the right defaults.
Yeah. The one thing we did come to, which actually isn't in this document, is that we're not going to have a different binding policy for tools as apps.
Tools are apps.
Yeah, they're just going to be the same. There was a 5-minute conversation of whether they should be different, and that was rejected.
I think that's good. I think the other thing I would ask, I don't know whether you cover this in Docker, but do we have logging for these kind of things?
That's discussed here. We want logging. The problem is where to log to.
Right.
So the console is not one of the places we're going to log.
Thank you.
And that is covered here. We have to figure out what our so there is some work going on to make it so that there's like this event stream, and that which the host I think actually doesn't write to because it's a runtime feature, so it gets super complicated, and that it's easy to take that event stream and direct it towards a file on your disk,
Right.
so that it has a Fusion logs kind of feel to it, which was actually a very nice experience. The problem is that since it's a runtime feature, the host doesn't use it,
Right.
for hopefully obvious reasons, and isn't very useful from a runtime binding case. So we have to figure that out.
Yeah, I think the only concern you have with Roll Forward is that if things crash, you have no idea. Whether
Exactly.
it's just buggy, or whether you can just fix it yourself by installing a matching runtime, right? So if there's a way for you to find out that, oh yeah, the app we just rolled forward because it was built for 2.1, but we made a break and change in 3.0 that they happen to depend on, then I can just fix it myself by just installing the 2.1 runtime. Yeah. That seems like that's the general direction we want to push people to say, we want to have less of a compat burden debate in full framework, but a reasonable one so that most things that you roll forward will actually work. But in the rare case it doesn't, the fix is just get a matching runtime on your box, right? And so the question there is more like how does that surface to the developer. All right, I think then there's a few more things I wanted to talk about, I think. So there's one thing which you should talk about because that is actually awesome. And this is this one here.
All the work I do is awesome.
No, from the
and you've got a question on
awesome.
you had a question on Twitch as well.
What's the question?
Is this one? Do you think
the mass operation? And I was like, shoo!
AVX
it's like, whoa.
could be used to create vectorized functions. Example. Functions that are written like they're operating on a single value but actually operate on a vector of values. This is a bit how shaders work. This is actually closer to stuff you've worked on.
Yeah, I don't know what to say. That sounds very familiar. No, I think we could. We already have features that kind of do that, right? So the two things that I think are worth talking about quickly is that the philosophy of the CLR has always been to kind of abstract away the hardware, right? So basically say you write managed code and then the JIT knows best and will exploit the hardware to the best capability, which is kind of what JITs are good at. You don't have to decide in your build lab what hardware you're running on, right? The downside of that approach is that, well, JIT is something that happens at runtime, so you cannot spend 5 hours determining the perfect set of machine instructions because then it takes forever for your program to actually execute. And so there's this trade-off. And then what we did in the last 5 years, I guess, is like kind of going more towards giving the developer more control. And so the first thing we did was our SIMD vector library, vector of t, where we still say, well, you have to think about how you vectorize your algorithm. However, we don't want you to tie yourself to a particular SIMD spec, like SSE2, SSE3, AVX, whatever. So how about we just give you an abstract data type that kind of says, well, here's a SIMD register, which we call vector of t. And you don't know the length up front, but it's static on the machine because it's tied to your processor. And then you just vectorize your stuff. But then that's also not the best case in some cases. So the next step we did was the hardware intrinsic stuff that we're working in CoreFX, where we say, well, what if we had one type per hardware spec? And then that type has a property that you can ask whether it's supported or not. And then you can write runtime light-up. So you can write a method and say, if you support AVX, do this. Else if you support SSE2, do this. And then the JIT is able to just kill all the code that it knows is statically unreachable because these properties are considered constants. And then there's not much heavy lifting required for the JIT, and you have pretty much 100% control of what machine instructions you're using when you run on that hardware. And so I think for graphic processors, we haven't done much yet, but I would imagine that we would go a very similar route with that. Stages of control.
So where were you trying to go before I interrupted you?
Basically the thing up here. So there's this new IoT repo that Rich is organizing.
Yeah, it's cool stuff.
Yeah, so what this was is, so in .NET Core 2.1, we added support for ARM32, which is a prerequisite to running on Raspberry Pis. And then in .NET Core 3.0, we've added support for programming all the pins that are on our Raspberry Pi, which is awesome. So that's like GPIO, PWM, SPI, I2C, and I probably missed at least one. Yeah. So as part of that, one of the things we quickly realized is just providing an API for these pins is necessary, but not sufficient for any kind of developer success. What you need is each one of these little devices, which are mostly called peripherals, actually. Basically, there's a whole bunch of bit twiddling and numeric magic that you have to do in order to work with these, because they're actually extremely low level. Right. They're actually, it's more or less the same level of low levelness as pinvoke, if not actually to some degree one step below that. So we created these things called, we're calling device bindings, which are basically a single class that allows you to interact in just a very nice C#.NET way with these devices, so that you can, get data off of a temperature sensor. You can write to an LCD panel, that kind of thing. And so we've got over a dozen of these now. This particular one, the BrickPy3 thing, is awesome because it enables you. It's a little device that you can put onto Lego Mindstorms, and instead of having the proprietary Lego Mindstorms thingamajig, you've got a Raspberry Pi, and then you can program the Lego Mindstorms in C# via the Pi. But you can see this one is all about running the servo motor thing.
Can you make it bigger?
Yeah, I'm just searching for the interesting stuff. So here's something where it's kind of what Rich just talked about. So I guess you want to read something and then...
Yeah, I mean, most .NET developers are not used to writing code like that. Right. I'm sure many of them are capable, but it's just... there's two different problems. One is the skill level required, and then the other one is kind of more the domain expertise. So what happens is you end up reading these data sheets.
Right.
So it's this PDF that basically says, this is the data that this device expects. This is the data that the device will produce. There's like 8 channels on this particular chip. You have to ask for data from each one of the channels in this order, and blah, blah, blah. So just before we get off this topic, just go to one of the ones. The one that I liked is, I mean, I liked all of them, but the one that had a nice picture is not this one. So if you go back to devices, it was the one that, not the character LCD. Well, I can't tell with all these names. You have to go to the README. Yeah, a little bit further down. It was the, okay, well, you went past the list.
He wants the links.
Yes. Not the liquid crystal display. Oh, the LED matrix driver, the MAX7219. That was a good, I liked that one. So
upon reflection, I think the FSharp names weren't that bad, actually.
Well, we didn't make these things
You're damn right.
So, well, this is a good one because so one of the things we've been asking people to do with their contributions is submit these fritzing diagrams. That's what these pictures are called. So it shows the Pi, but then it shows exactly how it's wired up and what the device looks like. So this particular one is an 8x8 .matrix module, as is fairly obvious. And so it allows you to light those things up. This particular device allows, I don't know if it's unlimited, but certainly fairly extensive daisy chaining. So you can have 8 of these things, for example, but you only have to connect up to the first one.
Right.
And then I think, I haven't looked at this particular code, but this device binding makes it so that you can talk to any of them. Just super nice. So you could build a case for these things, and then you could have like a readout of some kind on those. So very nice. And
so these device bindings are effectively more like convenience wrappers over the low-level protocols, which is what the IoT library exposes.
Yeah,
right?
I mean they are convenience wrappers in the way that you mean it, but I think they're actually fairly required.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
The magic numbers are not a good programming model for sure.
And so we now, pardon me, we build a NuGet package with all of these device bindings in it and push it up to MyGet every single day. And then with each release, we put up a seemingly stable one on NuGet.org, so that you can use NuGet to get these.
Yeah, and so from the list we just looked at, how many of them are done by us versus the community?
I think over 3/4 of them are done by the community.
Wow.
So when we built this repo, this outcome was absolutely our intention, and it's happening. So I actually built the first one, which was the MCP 3008. That's kind of how we built up this model, and I'm very happy with where this is headed.
This is cool stuff. And I think there's this other rule that we have, right? If there's anything which works on the name binder or binding has to occur somewhere, right? Is that
yeah. I work on all those projects.
All right. So I think this was almost everything we talked about.
So what about Docker? We haven't touched on some
Docker.
of our Docker announcements, and so maybe we should touch on that before we close up. Yeah.
So. The announcements I was going to point to they're actually written. They're being reviewed currently, so we can't actually point to them. But there's a couple things. One is that we're adopting a new policy for Alpine. So basically, the idea is we want to. By the way, should delete the part that says dropping Ubuntu for 3.0. We're actually probably not going to do that plan. So. nothing to see there.
You could have just not said that, you know.
Well, he had it on his screen.
No, it's not on his screen.
Yeah.
Was it on the other screen?
Anyway.
But we're not dropping Ubuntu.
We're not doing. Okay, so with Alpine, this is my favorite Linux distro, and so we are more and more committing to it. So we want to offer Docker images with the latest Alpine super quickly after the new Alpine comes out. So as of this year, they're in January, Alpine 3.9 shipped, where we believe we'll have support for that in probably March, which is good. But then we have to figure out what we're going to do with support for older Alpine versions. So our plan, and this is what the document says, is we aim to support new Alpine versions within 60 days, hopefully much sooner. And then we will support the older Alpine version for a quarter. So that's 3 months before dropping support for it from a Docker image standpoint. We'll still support it from like a .NET Core support policy standpoint, but we won't produce images for it anymore. We want to basically only kind of have one version of Alpine that we're supporting in Docker at any one time, modulo supporting the old one for 3 months. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that Microsoft has built its own container registry called Microsoft Container Registry, and all the Microsoft container-oriented teams are pushing to MCR. So the .NET team has started. So we actually just moved our nightly repo to MCR recently. And we're going to be moving the .NET repo to MCR in either February or March. And so the way to think about this is we will still have a bunch of pages on Docker Hub, just like we do today, where you can see all of our tags. There will actually be a different URL for them than the one today, although the ones that we use today will all forward to the new place, so none of the links will be broken. And we'll be using MCR more like a global CDN for all of our Docker images. So your from statements will change to point to a new registry, which is the MCR registry. And we will continue pushing updates to the floating tags on Docker Hub. So like the 2.1-SDK, which is a floating tag, we'll continue pushing new images for that tag. If you use 3-part tags, then you'll have to move to MCR to get a new 3-part tag. So for people who don't know anything about Docker, none of that probably made any sense. But we are moving to MCR in the very short future. Those are the two things.
And we're going to have to go back to IoT when we've got that wrapped up, because we've got somebody who is frantically raising and waving their hand on Twitch. And we want to make sure we get those questions. Do you have that in front of you with the BeagleBoard and the other
I see.
these questions? Yeah. Can you comment on that so we get that answered?
So so the first question is, are the GPO, basically, can this work on other single board computers other than Raspberry Pi? And the answer is yes. And it's yes in a couple of different ways. One is that, actually it talks about it on the homepage of this repo, emo. So we support a few different drivers. So one is, we do have specific drivers for Hummingbird and Raspberry Pi. We're actually kind of moving away a little bit from writing these board-specific drivers. We're going to probably make sysfs our default implementation. So that's actually where you use the file system to talk to the various pins. The only downside is sysfs is tremendously slow. There's this new daemon in Linux called libgpiod. Our plan is, we actually have an implementation already that we hope will go to either Preview 3 or Preview 4 of .NET Core 3. And it is tremendously faster than sysfs, but is just as compatible with sysfs and actually supports more features than sysfs. So as long as your device supports either sysfs or libgpiod, then our API should work. There are devices where the pin, well, I don't have a better word for this, assignments, are slightly different. So I don't know exactly how that works, but that aside, as long as your device supports sysfs or libgpiod, then our stuff should work for you.
And I can get the nothing. I can answer that.
Yeah, I'm not good for that.
Yeah, I know. From a C# perspective, I'll let Philip answer this from an F# perspective. The answer, I mean, I think what you're looking for is that void is a rather imperfect way to handle not returning a value. It creates the mess of func and action being parallel and just opens up a slew of issues. And the answer is right now we don't have plans. The language design team is a bunch of language designers, so they understand that this is something that might not be done if we were to start designing the language today. But what I would suggest on that is that the C# lang, also the VB lang, and do you have an F# lang for ideas? Mm-hmm. So these are places that you can go put an issue which is a feature about the language. So Roslyn is where you would put an issue like a bug or something specific to the way that C# behaves inside Visual Studio or those types of things. But in terms of you want to see something looked at for C# itself, the C# lang is a great place to put that. My guess is this is up there, but I think it'd be great for you to either put it up there or make a comment on an issue if it's already there. It's a great way to communicate to the whole language design team rather than just a couple of us. And so that's what I would suggest on that one. I understand why. That would be absolutely fantastic to have. And nothing may or may not be the right way to think about that just because that's not exactly what it is in VB and it looks like the VB nothing. But a type that can handle it. And I don't know, does F# have a...
well, we have the unit type.
So you have a unit type. That's what it's often called in functional languages. And it would be awesome, but whether or not its awesomeness could be fed into the language is a huge question, and it's not currently.
Depending on how you look at it, F# has kind of 3 bottom types. We have the unit, we have none for optionals, and we also have nulls because .NET has nulls.
Because .NET, yes.
So there's 3 bottom types.
Yeah.
Let's add a few more.
So the statement is, unit is great, but nothing has other uses.
All right, so I would love to hear more about that. So I think that the Twitch stream,
nothing has other.
Yes,
this is totally that's like that's t-shirt worthy. So absolutely, no, I think that'd be great to continue that conversation on C# lang. So that would be totally awesome. It sounds like F# sort of has that. If there's some aspect that F# doesn't have, I think it would be great to talk about that on F# lang, so we can broaden the conversations. That's the great thing about what we're doing these days, is that this and open source and these design repos, and we get to talk and we get to share what we're doing, which is so much fun.
So there's one thing that I wanted to talk about. I completely forgot about this. So this is JSON
we left something out.
So
that's a big deal.
So we've talked about this a lot. Like we often talk about how open source our design process is and how much of the stuff is exposed. So here's an example of something that is totally in flight right now, and it's probably one of the more popular API reviews we've ever done, I think, in terms of just viewers concurrently. And so here's the notes that I uploaded, which is, includes both, just the notes we talked about in the meeting, but it also links to the CoreFX design issue, as well as the YouTube link if you want to watch a 2-hour video of us ranting. The video is actually highly entertaining because it's just me in a room, everybody else on the call, so it looks kind of ridiculous, but the interesting thing is you have all the cool people on the call. So there's a bunch of really insightful conversations that are happening. And the same thing is when you go on YouTube, if you actually watch the video, on the side you also have the chat. So if you watch the video, you see the chat happening in real time, like in the point in the video. So you get a sense of what the community directions are and like what we responded with and what else, right? So it's pretty in-depth. So if you care about JSON serialization, I would suggest you check it out. It is something that we're shooting for 3.0. We will probably not have the Swiss Army knife serialization that JSON.NET provides, but our goal is to have what we call an MVP, minimum viable product, for a JSON serializer, so that we can eventually say, ASP.NET Core with Web API you can use effectively without JSON.NET and have meaningful serialization happening for you automatically. And the reason we built this whole JSON library now, there's a reader, there's a writer, there's a DOM, there's a serializer, is because we want people to give more flexibility so the platform is more independent of JSON.NET, because right now they're kind of tied at the hip. And the other part of it is we really want to go more after high throughput applications where having a Swiss Army knife like JSON.NET is not what you care about. You care more about throughput. And so our new JSON APIs are highly optimized for, if you just want to read or you just want to write, we get to a point where it's allocation free to do that for the common cases.
Yep. And James has a good post out. I don't remember, we don't have a link to it, but James has a good James Newton King, who did JSON.NET, has a good post about this new work and how it relates to JSON.NET and how these two things might live together in your world, while at the same time the new JSON stuff will allow some of the framework pieces you depend on to go faster and to have less dependencies that can get in the way, so where their version of JSON.NET conflicts with your version of JSON.NET. So there's a lot of goodness in this work. We sort of didn't set that up by explaining why we were doing it right here in this conversation, but James explained that pretty well, and so I think we can
there's
point
also,
to that.
if you want to go to the motivation, there is actually similar to the issue that, if I can spell it correctly, designs. There is an accepted proposal to do the JSON.NET work. Maybe it's still a PR? No, actually, it might have been an announcement, actually, now that I'm thinking about it.
Oh, it was an announcement.
It would be here, right?
Yeah, it was.
And mints, again, plural is a thing. And no, I just have to find it.
Well, you can just type JSON, or you can do that too.
There we go. So this one basically has our motivation, and it also has somewhere in here a quote from James, because he was asked, what do you think about that? And so we are very deliberate about that choice. It's not the typical Microsoft NIH or anything like that. I mean, we have supported JSON.NET for a very long time, and it's not that we are unhappy with it in any meaningful way, but if you want to change things fundamentally, sometimes you just can't do it in additive fashion, and that's an example of that.
Yep.
All right, so then I think that's all I had to say. If you guys have any more questions showing up?
I have one thing. I want to wish everybody happy Valentine's Day.
Okay, thank you.
That's right. Do your favorite emoji using a console app and send it to the loved ones. They will appreciate that.
Did I interrupt you? Were you saying something?
No, I was just saying that the JSON stuff is definitely interesting for us on the FSharp side, because we're starting to look at moving our entire tooling out of process. And the best way to do that, there's a standard language server protocol, but it uses JSON, and it's serializing data back and forth for IntelliSense is something that you want to keep as allocation free and as fast as possible, and this is sort of the way forward for that. So
there's cool stuff coming.
One question on the JSON stuff is, will there be a second design review on that, or was that one review considered satisfactory?
No, absolutely not. I think that was the conclusion at the end of the video, is that we covered barely the first half of what the GitHub issue covered. So if you look at the GitHub issue itself, it actually has, if I want to echo type, basically we talked about the basic API shape, the converter options, but then when you scroll down more, there's this whole attribute programming model, right? Like how do you mark your types? What behavior do you get, right? And we haven't covered any of that. So I think the next time, like if I would have to guess, I would say there's probably 2 more rounds of 2-hour reviews to just cover it. And then the question is, what follow-ups do we have? What design changes do we want to make? And do we want to review them again?
And what's the time frame on that, so people know what to look for, or where can they find the?
So the work is happening right now.
No.
So
If somebody wants to drop in live on your on the API review on those.
Oh, I see.
How would they find that, or what the timing on that? And because I know
follow Emo on Twitter.
So that's
okay. Follow Emo on Twitter. That'll work.
.NET on Twitter, like I retweeted from .NET as well. Like basically, we meet every Tuesday, 10 to 12 Pacific Standard Time, obviously, and we try to reserve the first hour for just going over the GitHub backlog and the second hour for reviews, unless there's bulky items like JSON, maybe just book the full 2 hours for just this one thing. And then there's also one-offs that we set up if we have to. So for example, last week, Thursday, we met for talking about pipelines. And so I tweeted, I think a few weeks ago, our schedule for the next 6 or 7 reviews. I retweeted this from the .NET account, and I will probably keep doing that. The very unfortunate thing is there's no calendar on YouTube, so I wish there would be a way for us to share that. If you go to the YouTube channel for .NET Foundation, at the very top you see like the next 3 or 4 things that happen to be scheduled, but there's no calendar view. So maybe we should just have a markdown file somewhere in GitHub and just maintain that. And then similar to the announcement repo, you can just follow that repo for updates. Maybe that's the way to go. But there's not a good way to do that.
Now I'm going to use this time to push my agenda, which is when we do this review next time, I really want to see comparative usage examples with JSON.NET. I feel like for some of the APIs we do, it's 100% net new, so there's no real API. We could like say, here's the Java API, but that would be both useful and not useful at the same time.
Right.
For this one, there is a clear baseline.
Yeah, it's basically like how you annotate
your current code.
types.
I mean, it's people's current code.
Yeah, well, so the thing I said, because I talked about this on the call, this isn't about migration. It's about usability.
Right.
There's zero, my personal feeling, I'm not the PM for this, I feel like there's zero migration requirement for this feature, meaning that that's not what this is about, but there is a usability requirement.
The cognitive load of if there's 2 JSON approaches and they're super different and you have to think about them differently, that would just stink.
Sure, and it's still slightly not the exact point I'm trying to get at, which is I think they can also be incredibly different. But if one is like 10x more, and 10x isn't even the right number. If one of them is, if JSON.NET is significantly more usable and intuitive than this one, then I think we have to discuss that. But I don't think the patterns have to be the same.
No, I mean, in fact, they probably can't, because one of the goals that we have is we can read and write from spans, which JSON.NET doesn't do in that way. Then there's also I think the thing where it matters the most is what kind of types can you serialize, and how do these types have to look in order to be serializable? So for example, James has done a great job of pretty much handling any type you throw at it, right? If the type is immutable, he handles that. If there's a constructor with matching parameters, I think he matches that. And like, the problem is that each of these things are increasing usability, but they also make the designer to serialize them much harder. And so if you want to optimize for throughput, then it becomes this, okay, we can only support that many scenarios. Which ones are we picking to support?
Yeah.
And which ones of them do we think are actually impactful versus just nice to have?
Yeah. Also, iList and IEnumerable scenarios are super important too.
And yeah, I mean, there's plenty of areas, and like the nice thing right now is like it's all in flight, and like if you follow the API reviews repo, for example, or the issues on CoreFX, there's plenty of highly skilled individuals commenting on this, both from the community as well as from Microsoft, right? There's people trying to use, for example, the JSON work in MVC. The guy that writes most of the MVC implementation is commenting on this, Ryan. Then there's obviously Fowler and all the other people you already know about. And then there's people from the Azure SDK and other. If you just want to attach yourself to a cool issue to follow, to meet and greet great people, that's one area where you can do that easily.
Yeah.
Okay.
Alrighty.
Hey, I think we're about out of time.
We are 1 hour 30 minutes. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I will start a Twitter hashtag people can submit questions for and PRs for. that we can highlight. I think that would be good.
And a PR there, you mean stuff people that we should call out. Things that if there's something that you think we ought to talk about, that would be awesome. We're going to be here every month? Every 2 weeks? Every month?
Every month. Every second Thursday.
Every second Thursday, you'll see us or some combination of us, sometimes with guests.
Yes.
And we have a bunch of other community stand-ups that are starting up with other teams. But this is it.
This is us. Hopefully you like us. Otherwise, you're stuck with us. Like.
Yeah, well, we're coming back. So I hope you like us because we will be back.
Alrighty, then I say, let's wave to the camera. Let's say goodbye. And then
Happy Valentine's Day.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.